A sudden eruption of deadly violence in China forces the president, Jintao, to abandon the G8 summit in Italy. Ethnic tension between Han Chinese migrants and Uyghur natives in the Xinjiang region has led to the deaths of scores of people. With shocking pictures of the two main sects battling it out on the streets, should China reconsider its policies in minority regions or risk a civil war? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Mariam Namazi. Thousands of security forces have been deployed in the city of Urumqi in China. A curfew was imposed overnight as the government attempts to end one of the worst cases of ethnic unrest the country has experienced in recent years. But is it too little, too late? Well, the riots have left at least 150 people dead and more than 1,400 have been arrested. The two ethnic groups involved in the violence are the Muslim Uighurs and the Han Chinese. The Uyghurs have for a long time considered themselves victims of discrimination against the majority Han Chinese. Over decades of tight rule, there have been sporadic incidents of violence, though never before on such a deadly scale. Well, the recent unrest was triggered by the government handling of a clash between Han and Uyghur factory workers in Guangdong province of southern China. This dispute had, in effect, 3,200 kilometers away in the Xinjiang region. A small number of Uyghurs gathered in the provincial capital Urumqi to protest. Now, those protests quickly spread across the city, escalating into deadly clashes between the two ethnic groups. But the violence in Xinjiang is not totally unexpected. Let's take a look at the wider region. Xinjiang is located in the northwest of the country, covering some 1.6 million square kilometers. That's around 1/6 of the entire country, making it the largest province in China. It's bordered by 9 countries: Russia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India and Tibet. In the 1940s, the region was an independent republic, but in 1949 it was declared as one of China's autonomous regions. 21 million people from 47 ethnic groups live in this region. The Uyghurs, a Muslim Turkic group, are the natives and the largest group in the region, representing 45% of the population. A close second at 40% are the migrant Han Chinese. In 1949, they represented a mere 6%. The Uyghurs perceive this increase as a systematic plot of the Chinese government to dilute them and prevent any serious resistance to Beijing's control. They also accuse the government of discriminating against them and imposing harsh restrictions on their religious practices. China, on the other hand, has accused Uyghur militants of staging a series of terrorist attacks on Chinese civilians since the 1990s and has hinted at links with al-Qaeda. Well, joining us today are our guests in London, Andrew Leung. He's an analyst on China affairs and a former representative of the Hong Kong government in the UK. In Toronto, Rukia Turdush, she's president of the Uyghur Canadian Society and spokesperson of the Turkmenistan Information Centre. And in Honolulu, Drew Gladney, he's a professor of anthropology at Pomona College and has written numerous books on the Muslims of China. Thank you for joining us. Rukia Turdush, if I can begin with you, we heard there that the catalyst for this latest bout of violence was a brawl between Han and Uyghur factory workers. But what are the underlying causes of this unrest?
Oh, thank you very much for having me today. I think there is the tension between the Uyghur people and the Han Chinese. It's not comes from yesterday or today, or it was continued since a decade since the Han Chinese government occupied East Turkestan, because the government itself, the Chinese government itself, is very racist system. So they deprived Uyghurs economic, political, and the religious rights and the freedoms. And they took over everything from this oil-rich land, and they put Uyghurs into extreme poverty. So they transferred millions of Han Chinese into Uyghur land and offer them free housing and good job opportunity, prosperity, and the wealth. So the Chinese government created big class difference between these two nations and increased the tension. And the second reason is Chinese government is should take first responsibility, because they know that clearly they occupied this land, and Uyghurs were the real owners of this land. So if they believe that if Uyghurs get educated and get prosperity, they maybe get stronger and against them, and maybe want back to their country. So they worry very much. Actually, if they offer prosperity to Uyghurs, if Uyghurs get prosperity, no one wants to take a risk and violence and those kind of things. But they believe that
Andrew
the wrong
Leung,
way.
do you agree with that assessment, that this is essentially an economic issue? The Uyghurs are not enjoying the same benefits, the same quality of life as the ethnic Han Chinese?
Well, I think that it's not just an economic question. Of course, this is a problem that has been boiling, over many years. But I think that as far as economic well-being is concerned, according to the independent indexes of the United Nations, there is no doubt that the Uyghur population in Xinjiang, the economic well-being has improved over the years. But on the other hand, the improvement of economic well-being is not enough when there are more and more Han Chinese living side by side with the Uyghur people. But of course, competing in an economy where the Han Chinese has got more competitive advantages because they are more educated and they are more connected with the Chinese economy along the eastern coast. So this has caused a lot of ethnic rivalry and disharmony.
Drew Gladney, there is a perception within China that actually the Uyghurs are not doing too badly. For the past few years, the government in China has poured billions of dollars into its western provinces as part of a campaign of development.
Well, absolutely. I think across China, most Han Chinese feel that there's a certain level of ingratitude at work here. The Uyghurs should be grateful for all the programs and developmental projects that the government has brought to the area, just as they feel the same thing about Tibet. And the riots last year in Tibet provoked a tremendous amount of anti-Tibetan sentiment among the broader Chinese population. Some people think actually that the heavy coverage of this event, even the announcement that the Premier Jintao returned from the G8 summit precisely for this issue, is to actually lead and contribute to greater anti-Uyghur sentiment throughout the broader Chinese population. I mean, basically increase Chinese nationalism within China.
Turki Rudush, why haven't the government's development projects in Xinjiang helped to address or redress the economic imbalances between the Han Chinese and the Muslim Uyghurs?
Because Chinese government's development policy in East Turkestan and Uyghur region didn't give any benefit to Uyghurs. It's beneficial just only for Han Chinese. Like I said, they created big class difference between these two nations because they're exploiting our rich natural resources and the oil, and they're immigrating millions of Han Chinese every year, and those wealth is only benefited to Han Chinese, and the Uyghurs can't get any benefit, and widespread unemployment over there among the Uyghurs, and all of them were jobless. So as they were frustrated, and the politically the government law is not protect the Uyghurs usually, only for the Han Chinese. That's why this detention.
Andrew Leung, do you agree that
didn't give any?
Yes. Do you agree that the government's economic program in the region has actually exacerbated the wealth inequalities between the Uyghurs and the Han Chinese, because the Uyghurs simply aren't benefiting from the new roads, railways, and the oil wealth, while the Han Chinese are?
Well, I think it's a question of equality and equity. Looking on the side of the Uyghur population, and as I said, according to independent indexes, there is no doubt that their livelihood has become, and their economic well-being has improved over the years. But vis-a-vis the Han Chinese, again, their competitive edge is not as strong as the Han Chinese, because, as I said, because of the level of education, the level of integration with the rest of the Chinese economy, the connections, and all this has caused a lot of problems. In addition, there are differences in religious background, racial background, and so all this has got to be managed very, very carefully. And I think that China should take a leaf from the book of Americans, from America's recent history. America's been a melting pot, and there are lots of racial and ethnic problems in the past. But to manage these very, very carefully is extremely important for China, because this is likely to be an Achilles heel if it's not going to be, if it's not being handled properly.
Well, let me put one of the points that you touched on to Drew Gladney, because it isn't just a question of the economic well-being of the Muslim Uyghurs. There are also huge constraints, huge restraints on their religious and social freedoms as well.
Well, absolutely. I think that that is really the rub that bothers the Uyghurs so much. Actually, the government celebrates Uyghur culture and history. It has language programs, bilingual education programs. That is really the envy of many other countries. However, many Uyghurs feel that this is only a token recognition of Uyghur culture, and that actually the real motive is to assimilate them into the broader Chinese mainstream. I think the truth is somewhere in between. There is a lot of preservation. There's a lot of money that goes into translating everything into Uyghur, preserving the language. But the reality is that it has to serve the government's agenda. And currently the feeling in China is that the Uyghur situation is a threat to Chinese rule. And not unlike Taiwan or Tibet, this feeling is that there's a desire to split the motherland, and that incites a lot of Chinese nationalism.
If we just look at the way the government has responded to this violence, this unrest, Turkiye Ruduş, the government blamed the violence on exiled Uyghurs seeking independence for their homeland, more specifically on Rabia Kadir. What do you make of those accusations?
That's not the true, because after the Guangdong incidents, after we saw the terrific video film how they beat them up, the killings, the Uyghurs, and they beat the Uyghur workers over there, and everybody get frustrated and get very angry. So they demand over there, the students legally use that modern technique of telephone line and the internet, demand from the government to bring the justice to this victims, but government didn't take any meaningful action. So that's why they went to the street, they raised the Chinese flag and peacefully demanded justice. They didn't demand anything else, and it's not the true. They masterminded for the overseas separatist group, because they cannot organize people in 1 week like that, bring them to the street. And another thing is, I would like to tell that it's not the bilingual policy right now China is giving to the Uyghurs. It's monolingual. They're teaching only the Chinese. They force our children to Chinese schools, learn from Chinese teacher, like a residential school many years ago in Canada. It's like that. So the young children has to be they remove the young children from their homeland and the family culture, brought to the inland China, studying at the Chinese school. And the primary school, they starting from 11 years, 12 years, they have to go to the Chinese school in inland China. They also have a school in East Turkestan region, Uyghur region, and all of them are Chinese language. That's bilingual. It's not the true. It's monolingual. That's why people frustrated.
Well, Andrew Leung, let me put that point to you. Do you agree that by blaming the riots on outside forces, the government is essentially trying to distract people from the internal causes of these protests, from the grievances of the Uyghur Muslims?
I think that the Chinese leadership, of course, is very, very anxious that this kind of a problem are not being exploited by a lot of alliances outside China. For example, you look at Tibet, you look at the Xinjiang problem, there are a lot of voices calling for independence and splitting the country. And now, don't forget that China is a nation with 55 minority groups, and they are all over China in the various provinces. So for China, segregation is not an option. It's integration. Now, but the challenge is how to integrate the various minorities groups, and not only economically but socially. So I think that there's
but the point is that this group are not being actually integrated. They're being discriminated against. One official document goes so far as to say that parents and legal guardians may not allow minors to participate in religious activities.
Well, I mean, you will look at the religion and also even literature, the languages. As my colleague was saying, when China is celebrating the kind of the local culture, there is no doubt that there is the local language, for example, is allowed to be practiced freely. But of course, it's a kind of a relative thing. As the more and more Han Chinese are now in Xinjiang, and also the Chinese economy, overshadows the local economy.
Rukia Turdush, I can see you shaking your head there. What's on your mind? What's your response to that?
Sorry?
It is not true, because Chinese government spending money only the development of the Han Chinese over there, and it's like as I said, that we don't have a religious freedom, and women and under 18 cannot practice religion, not allowed to go to the mosque, and the other Uyghur government workers were not allowed to go to the mosque. Only Chinese government appointed imams can stay in the mosque and directed the people, but those imams was brainwashed, and then they take course from the Chinese government party's school, and they actually propagandize Chinese government Communist Party's ideology rather than the religion, and we don't have really true religious freedom over there, and the language freedom too. But just that they show only people dancing at the street and the stage and somewhere. They just want to show the international world community that Uyghur people were happy and they were dancing and that they have a culture, but that's not the true.
Drew Gladney,
that's just for showcase.
Drew Gladney, President Hu Jintao has had to leave the G8 summit in Italy early to return home to deal with these latest developments. How worried are the Chinese authorities about these clashes in Xinjiang?
Well, I think they're extremely worried. We didn't see this level of concern over the riots in Tibet, and that signals the strategic importance of this region to China's future development. It's the last remaining source of domestic oil and energy resources, and also if China wants to import mineral and oil wealth from the outside, this is the closest area to Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. It's also bordering these other Muslim and republics, including India, and also bordering Tibet. So it's a very sensitive area, very important area, and it's critical to China's future development. I think people are very aware of Tibet. Xinjiang is the Tibet many people have never heard about. But in a lot of ways, it's more important to China because of its strategic locality and its rich resources.
Andrew Leung, the military is now out in force on the streets of Urumqi. Communications have been shut down. Even so, is there a danger of these protests now spreading to other cities, if not now, then perhaps further down the line in other cities in Xinjiang, which are heavily populated by Muslim Uyghurs?
Well, I think there is an immediate short-term problem for China to address. The most important thing is to restore law and order. I mean, there was a lot of violence resulting in deaths, and some of the Uyghur population, of course, they carried a traditional knives around for, it's been allowed to do so for a long time, and they're using these knives to commit crimes of murder, for example, in open daylight. And so this kind of things cannot be allowed to continue. So I can see that China is likely to adopt a very hard line to restore law and order. But that's not the all and end all. The most important thing is this problem that's been boiling over many years. And I think that China has got to look at its policies and how to implement policies which would be conducive to greater harmony amongst the different races.
Drew Gladney, looking ahead, do you think there will be a further clampdown? Will there be greater restrictions on Uyghurs in terms of meetings, religious gatherings, and so on?
Well, many Uyghurs feel that the publication and the coverage in the Chinese media about these riots is deliberately done so that they can increase the repression and the crackdowns. I think, actually, I'm hoping that the severity of this incident and the violence that everyone in China has witnessed will lead to a rethinking of China's developmental policies in the region that really have not satisfied the desires of the broader population. After all, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is named after the Uyghur. It is their homeland, and it has to be quite clear to the broader Chinese population that these people are not satisfied with the 50 years of development programs in the region. And I do think that we will see more incidents throughout the region. It's quite surprising that this riot took place in Urumqi, where the Uyghurs are only about 12% of the urban population. It's an urban area, whereas most of the problems in the past have been in the south, where there are larger Uyghur populations. It's more rural, they're more active, and places like Kashgar, Khotan, Kucha, where there have been some serious problems in the past. And we've heard that there have been riots in Kashgar already, and that it may be spreading to some of these other oasis towns.
Is there a Uyghur agenda or a desired outcome from these protests? Are we likely to see incidents flaring up in other parts of the region, as Drew Gladney says?
Oh, no, before we didn't know that, but people, they're using the internet and they're organizing. We'll protest in Urumqi, and then we're going to protest in Kashgar, Kumul, and other cities. But like China's government sends too many soldiers and armed police, and they crack down them. So since then they could not organize. I think we didn't heard yet, except Kashgar anywhere, the people went to the street. But like China, actually in Urumqi, like we have a little Uyghur population because China's government bring millions of Han Chinese and offered them residence in Urumqi. So, but Uyghur people over there get very angry after the Guangdong incidents, that mob killing, when they see that sparkled, that the hatred is starting many years. So that's why the Urumqi people, most of them, and has access to internet, because in the internet coffee shop over there, so they can know the news easily than the other cities. So they organized easily and right away went to street. But for the other cities, the more disconnected than the capital city of Urumqi, most of the Uyghurs, 77% of Uyghurs were farmers. So most of them doesn't have access for the internet, so they can't communicate each other and they can't inform it. There is no information for them, true information. So they can't easily organize. That's why maybe they could not go to the protest. But we are not expecting right now there will be protest again, because Chinese have an army and everything. They crack down protests, arresting people and killing Uyghurs. More than 90% of the Uyghurs.
So you're saying that stringent security measures and perhaps a lack of organization or access to communications among the Uyghurs might inhibit protests further down the line. But I want one quick final thought from you, Andrew Leung. Beyond responding to the immediate outbreak of violence, do authorities, will they at some point have to address the underlying causes of this unrest, chief among them being the lack of social and economic freedom for the Uyghurs?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's the crux of the problem. I think apart from bringing economic benefits to the Xinjiang province, it's just like giving sweets, so all the time to children who have grown up. I mean, there are aspirations you've got to satisfy, and there is a question of mutual understanding. So on the one hand, China needs to promote greater understanding amongst the Han Chinese of the aspirations of the Uyghur people, but also introducing policies to empower the Uyghur people more economically by training them more so that they become more competitive, by perhaps giving them more opportunities to take part in the administration, how to govern the province, take part in it. I think it's also trying to learn from experiences elsewhere, as I was mentioning, in America and other countries, and how to promote a truly melting pot. Because, as I said, China is a nation with 56 different races, and segregation is not an option. It's a harmonious integration, but it's a big challenge out there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Andrew Leung in London, Rukia Turdush in Toronto, and Drew Gladney in Honolulu. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.